This is the first episode of our Techkapihan sessions. The Techkapihan sessions is where we aim to share what Pointwest knows about the industry, the different industries that we cater to, we provide services for, and what expertise we have in those services and those technologies that we utilize to provide business transformation for our clients. And today, we are going to discuss healthcare information. And here we have Business Development Head for Healthcare, Juanlos JL Botor.
Good afternoon, Mike. Good afternoon to everyone.
So, JL, we'd probably start off with an industry overview of what healthcare information is all about.
Well, when we talk about healthcare information, we can talk about it in the language of IT services,
Yeah.
and we can also talk about it in the language of BPM services, or what we call before as the business process outsourcing services. And we can also talk about the healthcare landscape in terms of the locations of our supposed clients. It can be local, it can also be global. And when we talk about global clientele, we're basically talking opportunities that runs across the United States, Europe, Asia. So it really has a lot of reach for the opportunities in healthcare.
Oh, that's very interesting. So, when it comes to healthcare, what businesses are involved in such an industry?
Okay, so when we talk about, on the IT side, we talk about platforms, we talk about IT systems, we talk about tools. We talk about different applications that can be seen in hospitals, in clinics. We talk about the applications that run the devices, the wearables. And these are the IT side of it. Now, we have people running or doing data keying or doing data entry or doing simply analytical part of the processes of these wearables, devices, technologies, and these now are part of the BPO services. And that can be a service wherein you are operating in a hospital, but the back office processes are done offshore or elsewhere.
So you mentioned hospitals, clinics. So is it all about medical stuff?
When we talk about healthcare, we are definitely talking about a lot of medical stuff. When we talk about the IT component of the healthcare part, there are a lot of the IT side of this. When we talk about the revenue cycle management of a certain facility, we don't necessarily rely on the medical expertise, but more on how efficient, convenient the system can be created in such a way that there are bills to be paid and the processes of the paperwork can be done using the platform or the system. In such a case, there's really no medical know-how needed, but the objective is to make sure that when a patient gets in, he gets checked in the hospital, gets the necessary medical operation, diagnosis, treatment, and at the same time, after that service is rendered, he is discharged from the hospital, and that full cycle of it can be run through the system, and the person who engineered the workflow processes may not necessarily someone with a medical background.
So what you're saying is we also cater to those services that allow these processes and the systems, the platforms that support these tasks that are not really medical in nature. These are also covered by outsourcing services for healthcare.
Correct. So there are positions like data analyst. What they do are basic operations that are very important in the whole process of a medical claim, for example. But their line of service is basically data keying. And there may be in times data analysis in which, where do you put certain entries using a platform. Now, there might be instances wherein a medical background is needed, especially when there's now a mention of medical terminologies.
So there will still be a need for specialists in the field.
Yes, definitely a lot of specialists is needed in this line of business.
So a while ago you mentioned the BPM outsourcing. So what makes BPM outsourcing different from your typical contact center?
They may be similar in the sense that both the call center work and the BPM for healthcare work utilizes the same infrastructure. It means there might be an access of a file, an access of a raw material or a raw data from a server outside of the territory. In terms of the workflow they may be very similar.
Mhm.
It can be a night shift wherein you follow the time zone of the client.
The sun type of.
And it can also be a system wherein there's a workflow process. You do one step, somebody does the QA. You do the next step, somebody does the QA. If it's a cycle of several QA functions, then you're definitely doing the same thing as what the call centers does. But unlike the call centers wherein they definitely run a lot of voice, for the BPM side of the healthcare accounts, there are a lot of non-voice. So these are not live transactions. These are transactions wherein you are given a specific timeline for you to process and finish the work. But they are very different in terms of pricing. Because when you talk about non-voice processes, especially when you talk about the high-end business process outsourcing work, you are now looking at operations that would require specialized people. So the price structure may be different compared to the call centers. The level of analysis may be also different. Why? Because there's a lot of risk involved. That's why, because of the intricacy of the work, there's also the risk. That's why they're very strict with outsourcing high-level healthcare work to countries outside the United States.
Now, you kept on mentioning the United States or the US. So is the demand for healthcare information management services coming more from the North American region?
Well, we have to speak in, taking in consideration our experience as a company. But aside from the fact that we have, our seed accounts coming from the United States, we need to take a look at the landscape of the US healthcare market, or probably just the healthcare market in general. We are being preferred by companies globally. Why? Because we have the good command of the language of English. Okay, it would be difficult for countries in the other ASEAN region. Second to that is our close affinity to the United States. Our way of thinking, our way of communicating, it's really very close to the United States. So in the aspect of trust, we really don't need to prove anything. Aside from the English language, aside from the skill sets, familiarity, the word care has been widely used even with HIMA, the Healthcare Association of the Philippines. Why? Because that's a differentiator. Now, to give you a little story about care, I talked once with a client and asked him, why did you choose the Philippines? Why not the other destinations like India? So he mentioned the word care translated to the word malasakit. And he had a funny way of defining that. He said that, if you ride a plane, on the flight, you may have a stewardess who will give you the blanket. Here's your blanket. Just doing, the steward is doing the duty now.
Yeah.
But if it's a Filipino, he open the blanket and basically put it onto you. And that's what he described as the care. So, in the analogy, we can say that, looking at the differentiator, we do the extra mile. We do not we do not log out in our stations when it's 5 o'clock.
Yes,
Especially if we have some more deliverables.
Yes.
We are the type of people who cannot sleep tightly at night when we know for a fact that there are some items that we have not delivered for the day. So that's also a big differentiator.
Let's go back a bit to the regions, JL. You mentioned that there is a robust industry in the North America. There are a lot of opportunities for the Philippines there. How about the ASEAN region?
Well, I see that we have opportunities in the ASEAN region, or probably even in the Asia Pacific, more on the IT services.
More on the IT services.
I don't see that we may have opportunities in the BPO services, primarily because of the language, and primarily because most of the hospitals in the ASEAN region, excluding Singapore, they are calibrated in the language of the country.
Oh,
Yes. So there might be challenges. But in terms of the industry, for example, for Japan, the healthcare industry is very robust. They have very good infrastructure, but the problem with penetrating that market in the BPO opportunity is zero because of the problems with the language. Okay, so for IT, if we have a hospital system, if we have an electronic medical record system, if we have applications, tools that we can develop that can be customized to adapt to the language of the region, then yes, there are opportunities for that. We have seen inquiries from Cambodia, Myanmar, looking for hospital information system.
Very
That's why
interesting.
we're working on developing one.
That's great. I was about to ask you that, not meaning to fast forward a bit to what Pointwest is doing for healthcare. But do we have solutions, platforms that are being developed or?
Yeah, we have now the SEED platform,
Uh-huh.
and I think everybody knows the EasyMed platform
Yeah.
has all the essential functionalities to be transitioned, not just for a doctor finder app, but can be transitioned to do, bills payment for hospitals, including functionalities of a hospital information system. But aside from that, I think for next year, there's already a roadmap that we have set in order to really create a more a system that can better assist the region in terms of hospital systems,
Mhm.
clinic systems, medical record systems.
2017 seems like a very exciting year for the healthcare group.
Yes, I think all the data gathering, all the learnings that was done in 2016. So we definitely need to, leap forward and make sure that majority of our deliverables can be met next year.
So we're winding down the year 2016. How big is the healthcare industry at the moment?
Well, when we talk about the fields that we're doing right now, for example, for the BPM, or business process outsourcing, it was estimated in 2014 between 35 to 50 billion US dollars. But the gauge that they used in order to determine that, varies from point to point. For example, when you say about 35 billion US dollars, we're looking at the expenditures of the medical facilities when they do the documentation part of it. Now, if we include the IT spending, the cost of developing systems, maintaining systems, calibrating, customizing systems, and if we incorporate again the value or the cost that they run into the pharma companies, like clinical trials, understanding the BPO work that goes along a clinical research, we're talking about 3 trillion US dollars. So it's now up to Pointwest as a company to get a portion of that big pie. So there's really a big market, but how fast can we develop BPO services, IT systems, so that we could sell it outside? That's up for a company to answer.
Company like Pointwest.
Companies like Pointwest. And the good thing about it, we're a global player. We are serving the global market. So we are geared towards responding to the challenge.
Okay. So, JL, we'll take a 5-minute break.
Sure.
We'll let everyone take a breather, and we as well, and we'll come back and discuss more about Pointwest and healthcare.